Hi, welcome to another episode of RK Leadership. And I want to welcome my guest and CEO of EME Engineering, Chris Langford. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Chris, owner operator of EME Engineering. We're electrical, mechanical, plumbing, specialize in a number of different things, from energy, net zero construction to traditional buildings, things like that. Went to Ryerson University, now called Toronto Met, where I met this fine gentleman here, and a number of other guys that we're still closely connected with, and I appreciate the friendship that we've had over the years and the connections. It's nice to see you thriving as a professional. So happy to help you out with this kind of interview. It's kind of interesting, a little different outside of my normal day to day, but happy to be a part of it. We have two offices. We have one in Vaughan, we have one in Barrie, and we do engineering all across Canada, but our main focus is in the GTA.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. So can you help explain to our audience why you chose to get into the entrepreneurship world versus your traditional, 9 to 5 in an organization?
Yeah. So I started my career at Honda Canada, working in a manufacturing facility. Saw a lot of really good opportunities as a young engineer. It was great. You could take on whatever projects you wanted, and they'd let you run with it, which was phenomenal. But it was a lot of weekends, a lot of hard hours, not very family friendly. So at least what the position I was in. So I left Honda Canada and I went to a consulting firm in Aurelia. And my boss at that time was the owner of the company. He was a fantastic individual. I really liked working there. He was a great person. The company grew quite a bit and became a little bit of a different culture. And then I ended up leaving and starting EME in 2014. And one of the reasons I wanted to start the company is to have my vision of how a workplace should be translated out in my everyday. So instead of working for someone else and the idea of a company that they had being my reality, I wanted to create my own reality.
That's right.
So started off small, started with one person, and then grew to, before COVID, I think we were at 25, and now we're shrunk back down a little bit, but there's good things for that, which we just talked about in detail.
Very nice. No, you've done an excellent job, Chris, and I've been kind of keeping track in terms of his organization and how he's scaled and grew over the years. So it's great to see someone with this kind of skill set and being a leader in the industry. So with that said, 9 years with EME, can you talk us through some of the challenges that you faced over those years, and how did you overcome those challenges? What did you have to kind of do to overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so there's a lot when it comes to starting your own business. Definitely not easy. I really started the company relying on my relationships and building new relationships. So I'm someone who's interested in a net benefit for everybody. I don't think that when I get involved in a relationship, whether it's with employees and staff or with architects or consultants or contractors, it should always be mutually beneficial, and I try and bring that to the everyday. So a big challenge is when you're faced with something that conflicts and something that goes against your core values and how you deal with those conflicts. That was definitely the biggest learning curve starting off, was how do we take our vision and make it the vision of the bigger piece.
That's right.
So that was a challenge. And obviously there's the financial challenge as well. I was lucky. My wife is an engineer and she was working while I was off on my own adventure. I'm very thankful and blessed that she's part of the company now, because she's kind of the yin to my yang. I'm very much a different personality type than she is. So it works out really well where I have kind of the big visions and then she's got the granular detail that, like, okay, we can't just do everything. Let's plan this all out.
That's right.
So it works well.
So she's a real boss around here.
That's right.
All right, awesome. So Chris, with that said, can you talked about the business sense in terms of the challenges. Can you also now step back in terms of a leader and your leadership? And what are the challenges that you've had in terms of personnel and people and recruiting for certain roles here at EME?
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of packed. When it comes to personnel, I was very fortunate that the individuals I started the company with were people I already knew. So I had experience with them. I knew their personality types. I knew how to manage them. And from my background, just playing a lot of sports and being engaged with a lot of different friend groups, um, I've always able to kind of change. Chameleon's kind of a bad word, but I'm able to change my focus and my strategy and my attention depending on the people I'm interfacing with. So if I'm interfacing with a personality who's very loud and they want to dominate the conversation, I'm happy to sit back and let them do that. Or if I'm dealing with somebody who's more passive and wants someone else to lead the conversation, I'm happy doing that. So I always kind of tailor my management style to the individual I'm working with. I find that it works really well. Like as a manager of a number of different people, you can't just say my way is the best way all the time and
That's right.
you have to buck up and just do what I say because this is my game. That's not successful. That's not a long-term opportunity to thrive. That's just being bullish, I guess, is a word I would use. So and I kind of enjoy doing that, being able to connect with people and motivate people and understand what their framework is and how inserting pieces into the framework that help them see a global picture or a bigger picture anyway.
Awesome. So what have you seen in terms of the dynamics from 9 years ago to now in terms of the market and people coming up? What are some of those dynamics you've seen in terms of the challenges with recruiting new employees, which I'm sure you have?
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of challenges with recruiting new employees, that's for sure. So the biggest thing I think is the change in just social dynamics. So I came from a generation where our parents potentially had one job and they worked for one company and that was they got a career and they stuck with the company and that was it.
That's right.
Whereas, my generation is, you're typically in a place from 5 to 10 years and then you move on or you stick with the same company for your life. It's kind of a blend. Whereas the younger generation coming up, I find is very different and it's not right or wrong. It's just different. So my challenge now is trying to get people to maintain a level of engagement in the company and what we're doing. And I try to do that by giving them exciting things to work on, exciting projects, stuff like that. But it is definitely a challenge. I mean, I feel like the old guy in the room, like, well, back in my day.
Remember those conversations.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. So yeah, recruiting is definitely it's a hard thing to do. There's a lot of recruiters out there that kind of promise the world, but at the same time, they're trying to put pieces together and pieces don't always fit. I much prefer the organic growth method of, somebody, you've met them, you've dealt with them in the past, and they're, a good fit for the culture, you bring them in. It's hard to do now. Yeah, it's hard to do now, especially with, COVID changing the world where you don't necessarily see people face to face, right? It's tough. But.
So you prefer the referral method over the resume sending, methodology that I don't think it's worked for you for many years because again, I think it's the word of mouth that gets people into the places and who they know rather than what they have on their resume for most cases.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Now we have had success with both different styles, but I would always prefer like a word of mouth referral or that's hard. You got to have a big network. Right?
That's right. Yeah. And that's why networking is very important in any line of business. So thanks, Chris, for that. What about in terms of what's been the highlight or some of the positives that you've encountered over the 9 years here at EME?
Ooh, another loaded question. I think for me, some of the positives are working on just really interesting projects. Like we're not a huge company, but we really are able to capture a lot of our expertise and funnel that into specific things. So, I mean, you know this, but we were, well, I guess we were the engineer of record for the TTC bus electrification. So the first 3 bus garages that were heavily electrified for the new buses.
That's right.
You know, that was exciting, and that's a big project to our name, right? So that's the kind of thing that gets me excited about doing something different, like applying what we know about energy storage, and we know about solar, and we know about buildings, and we know about EV, but let's smash it all together into this massive project and do it successfully. That's really interesting stuff. So those are kind of, they're not always major successes, but just even, you know, changing someone's mindset on energy. Like, we deal with a lot of developers, and developers are notorious for having a specific framework of how they want to build a building. But when you can speak to the energy piece and the carbonization piece and help them to understand that there's technology out there that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and you'll be able to sell a superior product at a, like, that's going to be around for a long time, and that building is always going to be a positive input on the environment. Like, those are things that are big wins for me that are just kind of, you know, they're small, but they stick in my mind as
That's right.
big victories.
Great. So going back to you know, your values, your core values of the company, can you speak to us about what some of those core values are, and when you're going out to, you know, bidding on a job, or, you know, you're looking at a company to, you know, to get a job from, if there's misalignments between your value and what you're bidding for, or something that, you know, you don't necessarily believe in, do you walk away from that bid, or, you know, is it just purely you know, a financial decision?
That's a good question. So a lot of the times, if we get into a situation where our fundamentals don't align, it's unfortunately typically because there's a third party that's come into the environment that's created turmoil. So quite often, you know, we'll get along with architects and other engineers and developers, and then, you know, potentially there's, I'll use contractors. Sorry, contractors are some of my best clients, but I'll use a contractor as the bad guy in this situation. If a contractor comes in and their sole focus is to pillage that project and get money just for themselves out of it, it becomes really difficult and really tumultuous. So I do not like when that happens. I don't think anybody does, but that's by far my least favorite situation to deal with. It's really, it's not good for anybody. It's bad for the client. It's bad for everybody involved.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Awesome. So Chris, again, going back to the leadership piece, what would you say your leadership style is like?
Okay, so I was explaining earlier that we were enrolled in a program where we were focused on understanding different personality types. And fundamentally, I already did understand there are different personality types and how to deal with them and how to manage them, but I didn't know how to quantify it. Like, if you had asked me a year ago, explain this person over that person, I would be able to give you details, but not understand why. There's a book called Surrounded by Idiots. It's quite good. There's an audiobook of it too. And if you read through that book, or like I do, listen to the book when you're driving around, it really enlightens you to understanding, oh, I know that this person is this way, and I know that person is that way. Now I understand why, and
That's
now
right.
I understand how to deal with them in a more positive way. So I think that is really valuable. That's something that's really changed my mindset recently, is being able to quantify. I mean, not everybody falls in one category. Most people are 2 or 3 different categories, but it helps you understand kind of who they are and how to deal with them in an effective way. Because it's always like, you always want a positive output when you have an interaction, right?
Yeah. Now, do you feel in leadership, just like any aspect of, you know, your job, you're always learning as the years go by, or as time goes by, you're always learning about leadership as well, just like any other aspect of the job.
Yeah, 100% leader. So I like what you're up to, because a lot of the younger generation, even my generation, there wasn't a lot of leadership training.
Yes.
There was a lot of management training, but a manager is not necessarily a good leader, and good leaders don't always make good managers. So
That's right.
I like the focus on the skills of leaders and what's important to be a leader is critical for like young engineers. I'm using engineers because that's who I deal with, but younger individuals to understand there's there's differences and there's different techniques and there's a whole world full of information that you probably don't even know about unless you're out there trying to get it.
Exactly. And do you feel like what is the best way now, put yourself back in when you started, what's the best way, and sharing your advice with the younger folks, to obtain that leadership training or skill? Is it reading books, getting in there practicing, finding a mentor or a coach? What's the best way of obtaining that
I'd say
type of skills?
they're all part of the equation, right? Like there's no silver bullet that says if you do this, you'll be a great leader. Like you've got to get exposed. You've got to put yourself in awkward situations.
That's right.
Conflict resolution, huge. Like nobody teaches conflict resolution, and that's one of the biggest things that will make you a good leader. Because when I was younger, my go-to was to yell louder than the next guy. That doesn't work in a professional organization. You get away with it for when you're in your 20s and you're in a specific situation, but that's something I've definitely had to change over time, and it only comes with exposure and learning to deal with conflict resolution in a more organized way.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
So if you were to go back, what would you do differently?
I like where I am, so I don't know if I'd change anything.
No, in terms
But
of, again, in terms of, the leadership aspect, would you, read more books, or what
I
would you
see.
do differently in that term?
I definitely read more books. Knowing where I am now, I kind of got here organically just because of personality type and where I wanted to go. I would definitely read more books, understand, like, use all the resources that are out there, right? Get engaged with different work groups, try and build up on. I have kind of not famous, a phrase that I like to use. You don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
So if you want to be a leader and that's something you strive for and that's something you're interested in, you've got to go and get all the information and you got to apply it. Like knowing how math works and not applying math,
That's right.
is useless.
Yes.
So go and figure out what it is to be a good leader and what your leadership style is and what you want to be as a leader and develop it with practice. The only way to do it is with practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, did you have any mentors, in your career while getting to the stage, or?
Yeah, I had a lot of different mentors and who had very different management styles. So, my mentor at Honda was an electrician, probably the smartest guy I've ever met, but he was very rough around the edges, and that was valuable at the time, and that was important at the time. And I wouldn't be who I am without that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But would I want to be working for him now? Absolutely not.
That's right.
We're still friends,
Yeah.
but I would not want to be working for him.
That's right.
And then, another mentor I had was my old boss, Jack. Like he was the nicest person I've ever met in my life. He genuinely cared about everybody and their problems. And that's something that I saw coming from the rough around the edges guy to the caring guy. I was like, oh wow, this is like, this can be a successful model.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see kind of how along the way different mentors have different impacts, but you take the good with the bad and try and weed it all out.
That's right. So I want you to go back now, segue to this question. Go back and, from the time you started working till now, or actually before you got into the leadership role at EME, and all the leaders that you've had in your career. I want you to look at the 3 things that you took that you wouldn't do as a leader, and 3 things that you would take and apply it as a leader. So the good and the bad.
Okay. To think about that. So the things that I wouldn't do now that I may have done in the past is number 1, be too loud or yell and not listen, because that's definitely a technique that has been used in the past by myself and others that I've been involved with. number two, and I still remember this, I was in, I won't call it leadership training, but management training.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key principles they taught was if you're engaged with an employee or a coworker, you have to really make them think that you care about what they say. And I remember putting my hand up and saying, shouldn't you actually care about what they have to say? Well, if you do, that's great, but you need to make them think. So being genuine is something I'll put in both categories, that I would do, and being ingenuine or disgenuine, or I don't even know if that's the right word.
Authentic.
There you go.
Yes.
So I definitely would put that in a good and no good. Another no good would be being self-absorbed. So I've worked for a few people in the past where things that I've needed them to deal with as my leader, they just, not important. And it's been important things that are critical. Like,
Yeah.
At the time it was extremely important that we needed to resolve something, and to have my leader just kind of, well, I'm working on something else and this is important to me and what you're saying isn't, so let me do what I need to do. So engagement is something that I definitely would put in, again, both categories. I'm kind of cheating here. Right?
No, it's good.
And I guess some of the things I would do are, well, I said be genuine, be engaged, but learn more about each person and personality type. I think that's huge. Understanding who people are as a fundamental core, as a human being, and apply kind of strategies to engage with them to get that positive result. So those are all things that I've learned kind of along the way, but things that I would definitely focus attention on for sure.
Awesome. So next question I have for you, Chris, is what are some lessons that you'd like to share with the younger folks out there in terms of entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
and for the folks that want to get into that world?
So being an entrepreneur is tough. It's not always easy. You're not going to necessarily stumble on an idea that'll make you millions of dollars overnight. Some people do it. I'm not one of them, but some people do it. You have to be an entrepreneur, there's a thing called entrepreneurial spirit. You got to be willing to work hard for what you want, be dedicated, be focused on a goal, all important things. But I would say the biggest thing is don't be afraid to step out on a chance. As long as you've got the passion and you've got the ability, then you can do whatever you want to do. Like, if you want to build houses out of shipping containers, go for it. Just build up a metrics of how you're going to do it and jump in. But maintaining a positive attitude is always going to get you a lot further than maintaining, a concern on incremental finances. Like, being an entrepreneur is about taking risks. It's about,
there you go. Taking risks.
Yeah, it's about doing something because you want to do it and you have a passion for it. It's not, it's not something that you do if you like stability and you like, a fixed routine. It's something that you do if you like a vision and you want to get there.
That's right.
There's bumps along the way, but
yeah. So what do you do if you fail along the way?
Everybody fails along the way. Like, failure is I think it was Henry Ford had a famous phrase about failure, because something about it's the experience, right? So the experience of failure is something that you will always learn the most from. This is not his phrase, this is mine, but you always learn the most from your mistakes and when you fail.
That's right.
And that will change you as a person. And if you make it a positive thing, it will help you grow in ways that you can't even comprehend when you're going through it. But failure is important. If life was just all roses and lollipops, then nobody would have any drive or determination.
Exactly. Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks, Chris. And what leadership advice would you have for, let's say, not only the younger folks coming up pursuing leadership positions, but also the younger, because you work with a lot of engineers, what advice would you have for the young engineers pursuing leadership or careers in leadership, or wanting to take that step to a leadership role?
I would have to say, just from my experience with classmates and staff and other engineers I deal with, the biggest thing is define who you are as a person, understand your own shortcomings, and work on those things every day. So a lot of engineers are a specific personality type, but just because you're hardwired a certain way doesn't mean you can learn to thrive in another way. So to me, in my mind, the biggest component that contributes to success of a leader is someone who is able to identify and engage with others. So in order to do that, you've got to get outside your comfort zone.
That's right.
So I would say that's my biggest piece of advice is get outside your comfort zone, find ways to stretch your mind, and yeah, go do it.
Yeah. And again, that's interesting because, you know, going through engineering, we've seen a lot of the engineers are kind of introverted personalities, and communication is a huge and very important
Yeah,
piece of leadership.
absolutely.
So how do you train, or how do you ensure that the younger engineers that you hire, and you set them up for that leadership, successful role as a leader? How do you train them to develop better communication skills?
That's a good one. So obviously communication skills is multifaceted, right? It's verbal and technical
Yes.
and written. Um, the easiest one to master is written. And again, when it comes to conflict, I always find that's the best metrics to measure. So a strategy that I've told everybody I've worked with in the past, and I use not every day, but when conflict arises, is instead of writing an email and just hitting send, always write an email, take a minute, do something else, and then come back to it and review it as if I was the person reading it.
Hmm.
Because the problem with email is there's no tone. Like
That's right.
you can't dictate if someone's angry or yelling, or so your tone has to be very factual and very, this happened, this happened, this happened, this is the solution, this is what we're going to do. And remove emotion from everything, because it's when you're by yourself and you're reading an email, your state of mind will dictate how you respond.
Exactly.
And that goes further, that communication piece. If you're in a bad state of mind, try not to respond to anybody. Try to just, hit the snooze button and deal with it when your mind is clear and you're in a good state. Um, those are things that I always try and encourage our staff to do, and our management team here as well. And voicing concern to each other. So if we have a situation we're dealing with and it's, whatever it may be, um, we try and collaborate and come up with a response that's non-emotional, factual, and complete. So in terms of written communication, those are my big tips. Verbal communication is kind of the same, but dealing with that conflict resolution is important, because you never know. When I first went into consulting, I was extremely nervous to go to site reviews and to go to consultant meetings on site.
That's right.
Because I was always afraid that, a contractor or an architect would have this off the wall question that I wouldn't have the answer for, and I would just, oh. So I was always nervous going into these situations, and then seeing over time how, senior architects and senior engineers, they don't always have the answer off the top of their head. And a lot of them would say, well, I'll have to get back to you and let me take that back to the office. And that was something I was like, oh, wow, you don't need the answer to everything right away, which
That's
is,
right.
when you think about saying that, it's crazy. But as a young engineer, or whatever it is you do, you can't be afraid of that engagement, right? So I don't know. For me, that's kind of a big thing. Like, just understanding that it's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Chris again for spending his time with my very first interview from a leader in the engineering industry, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast. And if you have any questions, you know where to put your questions below in the box, and we'll hopefully get back to you. And if there's a specific question for Chris, please write it below, and I'll make sure I pass it on to him and have him answer those questions. And again, I want to thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you again, Chris, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.